Would you welcome Drew Colby to the front of the church? Have a seat. Can I pour you some water?
Sure.
I'd love for the congregation to get to know you. So tell us a little bit about you, where you grew up,
Sure.
brothers, sisters,
Yeah.
anything.
So I'm a Virginian through and through. I mentioned to someone earlier, I grew up in Richmond, and I was the middle child, which is a cross to bear for any middle child. And both of our parents were United Methodist clergy, which is a whole different cross to bear. Being
Both
a
your
preacher's
parents
kid,
are
both
United Methodist clergy in the state of Virginia
Yes.
who were serving in Richmond?
Yes.
Oh.
So, I have an older sister.
You know,
and a
you and I
younger brother.
lived like 5 miles apart from each other.
Yeah, I know. We never hung out.
No.
No.
You missed out, man.
Yeah, I know. I went to high school that was predominantly African American, which is cool because of the specialty center that was there. So that's a little unique thing about me. We were always in church and doing youth group stuff, kind of by default, but it formed us and made us who we were and who we are today, I think. I left there and went to William and Mary and studied music. And
Studied music?
I did.
Did you have an instrument or voice major?
So at William and Mary, it's a liberal arts school, so you just major in music, and then you can kind of pick within there. So I did some conducting and some composition and focused a lot in choral work. I was in an a cappella group, which is embarrassing, and but it was fun. It was kind of a drinking group with a singing problem, pretty much. But it saved money on fraternity dues, so that worked out nicely. Freshman year, met the woman who is now my wife, which is cool.
How did you meet?
I saw her on move-in day. She ran across a courtyard and jumped into the arms of her roommate, and I thought to myself, I'm going to like it here. And then we met through kind of colliding circles of friends, and she tried to set me up with a friend of hers, and her friend couldn't stand me. But she was like, hey, maybe I like this guy. So that all eventually worked out nicely. And then I wanted to be a choral conductor and apply to some schools, but I had no experience, so nobody would accept me. And so I kind of stumbled into a master's in vocal performance, which is like singing opera, which is strange. And
Where?
At Shenandoah University, Shenandoah Conservatory at Shenandoah University.
That's in Winchester, right?
Correct, it's in Winchester. And had a good time there. I think, looking back, that whole master's degree was just an opportunity for me, for God to do something different. And because while I was doing that, I was getting paid to sing in church, and that was basically the only reason I was in church, was because people paid me to sing as a part of their choir. So
That's the only reason you're there now, isn't it?
I guess so, yeah.
I mean, as an associate, you get paid to be there.
Yeah, it's true.
I wonder what you would do.
Well, I don't know. The world may never know until I quit. But I don't plan on quitting. So, but I was in church every Sunday, no matter what condition I had been in on Saturday night. I was there on Sunday morning, singing, and I think that formed me. Being there every Sunday formed me. And then I started working at this Episcopal church that I really liked, and then they had a choral conducting job, but it was the children's choir, and so I was the children's choir director for a little while. Then they were going to restart their youth ministry, and I said I could volunteer for that, and ended up getting hired part-time to do that. And then after a year of that, they asked me to be the Christian ed director, and then I said, okay, maybe I'll take one seminary class, just because I like some of this stuff.
So you said yes to doing the children's choirs.
Yes.
Then they needed a youth director, which wasn't a music position.
Correct.
And you said yes to that.
Yes.
Then they wanted you to do more Christian ed stuff, and so you're moving away from the music thing that you have a master's in.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. It just felt more and more like home, and in ways that was uncomfortable, because there was a lot about being a leader in the church that I did not feel good enough for. It's not that I didn't feel good enough. I was not good enough for, and that hasn't necessarily changed, but my perspective has changed. I did have like plenty of stuff that I had to kind of work through to feel like I could be a leader in the church with integrity. What did
you have to work through?
I just personal demons, which I don't think you have to go to seminary to face those, but that's how it happened for me. I went to seminary and continued to just love what it felt like to be studying scripture and leading in the church, but at the same time had this feeling like I'm not a holy person, and knew that, and ended up having to really just kind of tell the truth to myself and a bunch of people about things I didn't like about myself. And I received forgiveness and suddenly felt like, okay, if I can actually be forgiven, then I can do this.
Was there a moment when that happened?
Yeah, yeah, there was. I'll leave it at that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there was.
So something changed. So did you feel like an imposter before that?
No.
Okay.
No. Because everything that was true about my living of my faith and my, it felt like playing with the scriptures with teenagers, all of that was true and felt real. It was just my own unresolved stuff that I think just knew that, like, as long as that's in the trunk, I'm going to have to carry it around. So I just had to kind of get it out of the trunk. And God and my family could handle that. So that worked out okay. Yeah.
I'm glad it worked out.
Me too.
When you were thinking about going to seminary, did you talk it over with your United Methodist pastor parents who lived in Richmond?
They were good at not talking about this stuff much, even though they had kind of wondered at times. Because I had, as a teenager and in college and stuff like that, I had kind of dabbled in playing in church bands and doing church music and doing various leadership kind of things, and all of that. There were some gifts and talents and interests there that they had seen all along. But then I remember having a conversation with my mom when I was like, maybe I'll go to seminary, and she was like, great, and like almost pulled out a folder of, here are the seminaries you could choose. And by the way, go to this one because you'll really like it. And
was it the same one she went to?
It did happen to be the same one she went to.
Just happened to be.
And my dad. And when I went there for my admissions interview.
Where would you go?
Wesley Seminary in D.C. When I went there for my admissions interview, I went to the library and needed to take down a note. And at some libraries they have the old library cards that were stuffed in the little pocket in a library book, that just a stack of them that you can use to write notes. So I pulled one out, wrote a note on it, and turned it over, and it was from a book that my dad had checked out in like 1979. And on like coffee house ministry, because
fortunately nobody else had taken that page out to make a note, or you would never have known that.
Yeah, so that was cool. But they've been supportive, but have been good about not forecasting, because I had as much rebellious streak as any other teenager, so not forecasting, kind of keeping it open a little bit was good. I still had to go to church, like that wasn't a choice, but I didn't have to be a pastor. That was something they let me kind of discover for myself. So that was good. And then, so I went to seminary and worked at that Episcopal church in Upperville, Virginia. If you ever drive on Route 50 headed west, there's this big Episcopal church on Route 50 in Upperville, and it's called Trinity Upperville, and that's where I was, and loved it there. It's a lot of wealth out there. It was built by Bunny Mellon, and it's a Norman cathedral built a foundry on the grounds and everything to put it together. And I was coming in there kind of an anti-establishment hippie a little bit, and I kind of learned there that like not all the rich are wicked. And that was a lesson I needed to learn if I was going to keep going. And then my last year of seminary, I did an internship at Rising Hope which the church that this church knows, and there I was like, finally I'm going to be with Jesus's people, and there I learned not all the poor are righteous, So I finished that, and then received my first appointment as an associate pastor at St. Stephen's in Burke, right on Braddock Road, and I've been there. I'm in my 5th year there, and I can tell you how much I've learned and grown there too. It's been really amazing. I think that I said this at our charge conference. I think that my best advice to anybody is if you want to grow in holiness and love of God and neighbor, all you have to do is marry my wife, go to seminary, and become a pastor. Because
that's it.
That's exactly how it happened for me, and I can't tell you any other way, because that's kind of how it's happened for me.
So, having parents who are deeply committed to the church, was reading the Bible and doing prayer a part of your growing up experience?
Not exactly. It's funny, we have a 3-year-old now, my wife and I, and we do more at-home spiritual practices than I remember doing. But with my parents, I think that it was more insidious than let's sit down and pray. It was everything we were doing, everything that my parents were pointing out to us while we were in the back seat about like where we were driving around town. All of that was there was spiritual formation. It just wasn't necessarily an established liturgy or family Bible time. We were kind of in the middle of it. So yeah, we do it differently now. I married a Catholic woman after serving in an Episcopal church, so we have an evening liturgy that we do with our 3-year-old because I fell in love with liturgy, and she's too young to walk out. So we'll see how ask me in 6 years when she has more power over us.
I'm worried about what's in your trunk, and then if she's going to follow suit with that, yeah. Or whether she's going to do the ritual thing that you're giving to her.
You didn't need to bring that future up tonight.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So, did you start reading the Scripture?
My parents got me a Bible that's in my truck right now for my 18th birthday, and
they waited till you were 18 to give you a Bible.
Well, I think I had Bibles before that, but
okay.
That was a Bible with my name on it, and it was a study Bible. And I didn't open it until I was like 22 at seminary. So really, no, it wasn't a major part of growing up. Again, it's not that I wasn't being formed. It's just that it wasn't in kind of classical form. But even just that long ago, I think Christian values and assumed Christianity was even that much more a thing of our culture back then, so that people it's just totally different now, because I think that the children that my generation are raising, religion is it's like a secret. It's not something you share about or hear about walking around. I think it was even more available to me just in the air when I was growing up than
both
it is
in the
now.
culture and in your parents' lives.
Exactly.
So it wasn't something they had to be taught because you just absorbed it from what was around you.
Yeah, I think so.
There was a time in my ministry when I could announce that I had a Sunday school class for children and people would come. But I didn't have to say anything about it. Mm-hmm. That I had great teachers, or we had great curriculum, or that we had a great room in which it would happen, or we offered snacks. Mm-hmm. I could just say we're having Sunday school for kids, and parents would bring their kids. Now I have to convince parents that Sunday school is a worthwhile activity for their kids, that the culture has changed. Mm-hmm. So I was just thinking about the passage we heard from the book of Exodus, 31st chapter, where there are specially gifted people who are learning how to create a temple. And then once this gorgeous, phenomenal temple is created, the instructions about the Sabbath come. And so I was thinking about your time with the little girl and having the rituals, having this Catholic, is she still Catholic? Mm-hmm. So having this Catholic wife, this Episcopal background, you're a parent. You have like lots of religion in your life.
Yes.
So when you think about the Sabbath, with all of your good Wesley education, reading the Bible, is there something that comes to mind?
The immediate thing that comes to mind is that I'm not good at it.
You're not good at Sabbath?
Not really, no. But I'm okay with that, because I think it's probably something, it may have been that in the time of Moses, God could say, observe the Sabbath, and if you don't, you'll be put to death, and no one would bat an eye.
Okay, now, don't you get like that Moses is the one who's describing this event? And so it was Moses who put to death an Egyptian who wasn't observing the Sabbath? So I just kind of think Moses decided, well, God's just like me. So we're going to put to death somebody if you don't keep the Sabbath. Or another way of thinking of it is, if you don't keep the Sabbath, you're going to die.
Yes. Which, and that reading feels true. And so the pressure is on, because I had a child 3 years ago. We had a child. My wife gave labor. I did not have a child. But I work out a lot more now because the pressure's on. Because I've got a 3-year-old, which is, as she grows, it's like time is being measured much more vividly for me. And so the same thing is true of the Sabbath, that I think now that I'm parenting, I'm aware of how my rest is for my daughter, and as much as it is for me.
Say more.
So it's for me in that it's a gift that God is giving us, which is it's a strange interpretation. It's easier to see if the kind of death that comes from not observing the Sabbath is the inevitable kind of death that if you don't rest, you will die.
We don't believe that.
What?
We believe that there's always one more thing we have to do.
Absolutely.
That there's one more master we have to say yes to. That when you get to work, the boss is already there and the boss is going to stay late. So if you don't stay late, you won't be able to get promoted.
And if I just get this done, then I can rest.
Right. And there's always, that's the lie we tell ourselves.
Right.
That we're this close to having a really good rest.
Right.
And we just do more and more and more. And we don't realize that it's all across the culture. It's not just individually. But we were talking about what the past was like. And I'm old enough to remember Blue Laws, Virginia, where almost everything kind of shut down. Not that I'm proclaiming that's what we should be doing, but when the culture had a way of resting, I could absorb from the culture, like in the ethos, what it meant to rest. If you don't do it in your household, your daughter will never know what that's like.
Right. She will observe me on my laptop in the evenings and assume that that's what it means to adult. She'll observe me on my smartphone. She'll observe me saying, sorry, I can't go because I have this thing, and assume that that's just part of what it means to be an adult. And because I'm a Christian, and on top of that, a pastor, she'll assume that that's really what it means to be a Christian too. Or at least that being a Christian, like that's as good as it gets. Being a Christian is, you still have to work all the time. And so the pressure has been on to set up different patterns of our life. And not like God's going to be angry with me if I don't do this, but that God has actually made this possible. And so it is possible. It's a gift. And to not set up those patterns is to leave a gift unopened. And what a shame to not open every gift that God has given us. So it means that luckily I think I was well taught. So when I started working full time, I tried really hard to not bring work home. And so when I was I don't have a home office, so I don't know where to do my work when I'm home, which is nice. I'm a pastor, which is not the same as being the CFO of one of these buildings that's around here. So I'm privileged in that regard too. But I got to set a pattern. My wife just got a big new job with a lot more expectations on her, and that's been a real challenge for us because she no longer has the luxury of not bringing work home. It follows her home, and so we have to kind of up our discipline in order to be able to enjoy the gift of the Sabbath. So it is work, but it's work to enjoy something that God has made possible. So it's just, I mean, it's weird in that way, but on days when our pattern functions the way that God has set it up, we get to be a family rather than roommates.
So being roommates, like in college, everybody goes to their own class.
Yeah.
And if you happen to share some moments in the room together, that's nice, but it's not intended.
Yeah,
It's
or the other
accidental.
analogy is that our home is a co-working space.
Everybody's always working.
Yeah.
So when I was researching the passage in Genesis about God creating the world, one author described the seventh day, the day of rest, as also a creation. When, all the rest of the creation worked was there was space, and then there was earth, and there was land, and then he separated the land and the sea. And so there were no birds, and then there were birds. There was nothing. And so on the seventh day, God created tranquility, created peace, so that creation isn't complete without the seventh day. And what's happening in Egypt is they don't get the completeness of God's creation. And so the labor that they have been doing for hundreds of years is replaced with taking rest, which is like the completion of their humanity. It's not like you get the work done and then you rest, but the rest is as much a part of creation as the birds and the mountains and the seas. That rest is at the very, and it's kind of this cool thing, because you can take it with you anywhere.
Absolutely. And so in preparation for tonight, the other thing I thought of is other places where the Sabbath comes up, especially in the Gospels.
Yeah.
And what's like 2/3 of Jesus' miracles happen on the Sabbath. And so it kind of, you can ask the question, what is Jesus up to on the Sabbath? He's healing people.
Yeah.
And so the implication could be, so then on our Sabbath, we better be healing people too. I think that's a poor reading. I think instead, it shows us that what God, even God with us, is up to on the Sabbath is healing. And so the reason for the Sabbath is to receive this healing. In other places in Exodus and Deuteronomy, the Sabbath is not just the one day of the week, but also the seventh year in an agrarian culture, where on the seventh year you let all your fields lie fallow so that the ground can heal. And who's healing the ground? Obviously, it's God, the source of all life. So,
Or that healing's naturally built into creation, but you have to let it happen.
right.
The idea that you have to stop working for this work to be done is a fascinating idea, isn't it? That there is this work that you can let happen, but it only can happen by resting, by stillness.
Yes.
It's a fascinating thing.
And so, for liberated slaves coming out of Egypt, this Sabbath rest is a chance to say, I'm not a slave anymore.
Isn't that what it really is? Isn't that
Yeah.
part of why it's so important?
Yeah.
That I am owned by God, I'm not owned by Pharaoh. And God tells me to rest. And so my sign of who I am, my dignity, my place in the world is because I take this rest.
Yes.
So how do you do it? How do you get rest? How does your family do Sabbath?
Occasionally. I wish that I could say we nail it. We don't. My day off from work is the day that I'm the one caring for Hannah. So I'm single parenting on my day off, and that for me is work. Like, I don't know, for other parents, it might feel like rest to you, but for me that's work too. So
She's 3, right?
She's 3, yeah, and she is always up for something, and I can't just sit her in front of the TV and binge watch because Parenting Magazine says that's bad. So for me, it's work. Parenting doesn't necessarily come naturally to me. Maybe when she's a teenager, it'll be easier. Probably not. I shouldn't have even said that. So part of it for us is kind of establishing the norm for our family, and the norm for our family is we don't bring work home. So when we're home at the end of the day, we're done. And the thing that we're kind of adding to that is, in fact, when we're home at the end of the day, our phones are off. And we're just here. So we've established that as the norm, which means it happens sometimes. But it's...
Do you know that we live in Egypt now?
Yes.
Because we like, if you can imagine being a slave is like having a collar around your neck. We buy our phones and spend $1,000 on each one, and we're so excited because we can get calls all the time. Like, we love being slaves. Mm-hmm. We are incredibly important because of how much work that we do. And that we know there are people at work that can't get their job done if they don't contact us on our day off because they're in the middle of a project. And that project will cost the company money if they're not able to complete their part of the work. And they can't complete it if I don't make my contribution to what it is they're trying to do. So that, like, the entire culture is based on working all the time. Mm. So trying to carve out space is really hard.
Yeah, and plenty of people's work is super high stakes.
That's right.
Especially in this area. Like, if I don't get an email, somebody might not get visited for another 24 hours or something.
Right.
But there are other people that if they don't answer their email, that has
national security is at risk.
Yeah. And so in that context, I don't know. I think it's something that kind of has to be discerned because we don't like to do it for ourselves. The culture's not going to do it for us. And so perhaps we just have to pray that God will do it for us and give us those moments of rest, a day of rest, a week of rest, and just present it to us because it's really hard to choose it for ourselves. Because not only is our culture Pharaoh, I think I am my own Pharaoh. And to leave, to open space or to accept space in which I'm not productive is to tell myself I'm not that important.
So how do you like this analogy? I read this morning.
Okay.
So you have Pharaoh's army is chasing the Israelites through the Red Sea, and they get over to the Promised Land on the other side, or at least to the other side of the Red Sea. And then the water comes in and swallows up the Egyptians, who are their slave masters, their taskmasters. But then some people, the Israel on the other side said, so they throw ropes in to the taskmasters and said, come, why don't you join us? So that now, whenever they kind of relax, they have a taskmaster in their head like this ghost from Egypt. They say, no, you have to go. Didn't you promise your wife you're going to fix the truck? You can hear that thing rumbling. And there's never any time off where you don't think, I've got one more thing I have to do. Like, there's these ghosts from our taskmasters of the past, maybe hidden in the trunk of our cars, who come back and are kind of speaking in our head, and we never feel at peace.
And so perhaps the good news is just to notice that voice is not God's voice. That all of the voices that are saying, you need to be doing this, you should be doing this, why aren't you doing this, why haven't you done this? None of those voices are God's voice. That God's voice is the only one saying, let's hang out and just rest for a little bit.
Yeah, I think you can have like a Sabbath hour and a Sabbath evening and a Sabbath day. It may not all show up on Sunday, but you can carve out pieces in which you give yourself permission to rest deeply.
And to trust that if the world, that whether the world ends or not in this hour is not up to me. That God can handle everything while I'm not handling everything. It's hard.
Yeah.
Because we have plenty of other narratives in our head.
Yeah. One of the things that I think Moses is getting at in the passage is that we can give God our attention. That the narrative of God's work in the world is so fascinating, so interesting, so captivating, and that being in God's presence, experiencing the deep forgiveness that you knew, that your humanity is enough with God, that with you and God, everything's complete. That's kind of the experience of Sabbath, right? It's the end of the week. Everything's done. And then you start over. It's what I find most people are looking for, is that moment when they know everything's okay.
Because of God.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not doing this alone.
Right.
It's almost as if the gift of rest goes underutilized, but it's always there.
Yeah, and we feel like there's an energy crisis, but it's probably just a misappropriation of
So what are you
particular
doing after
energies.
this?
After this, I'm heading back to work. Not really. Well, kind of. So I work primarily with teenagers, and today we had a big service opportunity where we gave away almost 500 Thanksgiving meals from our church.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Good God, yeah.
500.
Yeah. And
When?
from between 6:30 and 11:30 this morning.
So when'd you get up?
I got up at 5.
And what are you doing after this?
So we tapped into the shadow economy of teenage necessary service hours, and so we posted our thing on Fairfax County's I Need Service Hours website, and so 100 teenagers came to help us with that today, and so I met.
You didn't know them all?
I did not. No.
Not from your youth group?
No, exactly. So, but I went around and met each of them and invited them to a bonfire tonight to say thank you, so that in a space where we're not working, we could get to know each other better. And not 100 of them will come, but maybe 5 will. So at about 7:30, that's when that's starting at our church.
So you've come here to talk with me about the Sabbath, and the way you did it was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then you're going back at 7:30 tonight, and you'll be home by 10, right?
Yeah. So nobody should leave here, myself included, feeling like there's a person that really nailed it. At any time that
You're not my role model?
No. All of the pastors, all of the 18 pastors at Aldersgate are my role models. So thank you for that. So yeah, it's.
I was just going to say that somebody who gets Sabbath also works really hard. That work isn't the opposite of Sabbath.
That's a graceful way of interpreting the problem that you just set up.
But then it would be my gladness for you that there will come a moment this week where you don't work. That you do fabulous work to feed 500 people, to engage teenagers who are doing it in Christ's name, even if they don't know how to say that name. And then you're going to celebrate their company by joining them at a bonfire and attempting to build a relationship with them in which you have nothing to gain except to make their lives better. It's incredible work for you to do. I applaud you. And I am really hoping that you also get to breathe and enjoy your 3-year-old little girl.
Thank you. That'll be my prayer too. I do have it scheduled.
When?
Monday.
Monday.
The great irony, of course, is the other thing I have scheduled for Monday is raking all the leaves in my yard. So,
Are you going to put a rake in the 3-year-old's hand?
she has a rake.
I know.
Yeah. She doesn't use it, but she owns it.
Would you thank Drew Colby for joining us tonight?
Thanks.
Well done.